At least one did. Okay. So I will open the November 16th meeting of the Environmental Planning Commission of the City of Mountain View at 7:05 p.m. Interpretation will be provided this evening in both Spanish and Chinese for item 5.1. Zoom translator function identified as the globe located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please click the globe and select the language you prefer, English, Spanish, or Chinese. If you do nothing, you will hear the English deliberation. But you will not be able to hear English translation of Spanish or English speakers. Please welcome Elena Garcia and Eileen Lee, who will provide translation services tonight. Elena, we'll turn it over to you to start going through the Spanish interpretation. Elena? I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, is she already in the channel? Yeah, you have to take her out of the channel and then put her in the channel after she gives her spiel.
My apologies, Elena. Can you try again?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Buenas noches a todos y gracias por venir a la sesión de estudio de Housing Element esta noche. Si ocupa interpretación al español, por favor, presione el icono que dice interpretación con un globo al inferior de su pantalla y podrá escuchar el español. Gracias.
Thank you. And Eileen, we'll turn over to you for the Chinese language instructions and how to set up interpretation function.
晚上好，今天晚上我们的住房要素更新的研讨会将提供中文和西班牙语的翻译。那等下您会在屏幕下方看到一个地球仪的标志，那您可以点击标志来选择您想要倾听的语言。谢谢 ，Thank you.
Thank you. During a state of emergency, the meeting will be conducted in accordance with California Government Code 54953E, as authorized by resolution of the City Council. Please contact city.clerk@mountainview.gov to obtain a copy of the applicable resolution. All members of the EPC are participating in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members wishing to observe the meeting live may do so at mountainview.legistar.com, on YouTube at mountainview.gov/YouTube, and on Comcast Channel 26. As noted in the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comment during the public comment period of an item by joining the Zoom webinar with a webinar ID of 853-0070-5240. All votes will be taken by roll call vote. I'll now ask the EPC clerk to proceed with the roll call.
Commissioner Clark?
Here.
Commissioner Dempsey?
Here.
Commissioner Gutierrez?
Here.
Commissioner Haymeyer?
Here, though I'd like to note, Hank and I have a little bit of an issue. He was having difficulty logging on, so he's using my link. So the display name, there's only one Commissioner Haymeyer here tonight.
No worries, I can rename you in a moment.
Thank you.
Glad to be part of the family.
Welcome. Sorry about that.
Commissioner Nunez?
Here.
Vice Chair Yin?
Here.
And Chair Cranston?
Here.
Okay, all commissioners are present.
Yeah, so item 3 on the agenda is the meeting minutes. We'll be reviewing the minutes for the meetings of September 21st, 2022 and November 2nd, 2022. First, any discussion from commissioners? None. No, we'll move to public comment. Would any member of the public like to comment on the meeting minutes from one of those two meetings? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk will start the timer and let you know when your time is up. For everyone wishing to speak on the minutes?
No one wishing to speak on the minutes.
Okay. Then I'll bring it back to the commission. And do I have a motion, Commissioner Clark?
So I'll move that we approve the EPC minutes, meeting minutes from September 21st and November 2nd, 2022.
And Commissioner Gutierrez?
Second, please.
Okay. Moved in second. If there's no discussion, Ms. Whitehill, can you take the roll?
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Dempsey,
Aye.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Aye.
Commissioner Haymeyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Nunez,
Aye.
Vice Chair Yin,
Aye.
and Chair Cranston.
Aye. Thank you.
Motion carries unanimously.
Item number 4 on the agenda is oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the commission on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to talk on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the commission from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on a non-agenda item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk will start the timer to let you know when your time is up. Do we have anyone wishing to speak on open?
We have no one wishing to speak in open communications.
Okay. We'll bring it back to the commission. Item 5 is a study session where the 5.1 is revised 2023 to 2031 draft housing element. There'll be a staff presentation from Ellen Yao, Senior Planner. Oh.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. All right. Well, thank you, Chair Cranston and Commissioners. Tonight, we are providing an update on the revised draft housing element. My name is Ellen Yao, Project Planner, and I'm joined by Eric Anderson, Advanced Planning Manager, and our consultants, Stephanie Hager from BAE and Bev Choi from ESA. So tonight, I just want to clarify, HCD has recommended that cities submit revised drafts rather than adopted versions. So tonight's and December's council sessions will just solely focus on revisions that were made to the draft housing element document, and then we're seeking additional policy direction. So the other parts of the housing element project, such as the rezonings that are related to the housing element and the environmental impact report, will be presented at a separate public meeting. And I'll go over that later during our schedule slide. In this presentation, we will cover the key changes that we made to the housing element that was in response to HCD comments. Particularly, you can see it's the sites inventory, changes to the AFFH analysis, and changes to the programs. And then the second main part will present staff's analysis of the alternate programs that were mentioned in public comments. They weren't included in the first or second drafts, but they can be included based off of the feedback from tonight and council direction in December. We have 2 main questions for EPC related to the programs. Does EPC have any recommendations on the new or modified programs since the last draft housing element? And does the EPC recommend adding any of the alternate programs? And if so, where and when to add them? So each of these questions will be shown after the relevant section and in the concluding slide. I just want to set that up for the beginning of the presentation. So I'm gonna go over the general HCD comments. So after the last round of study sessions with EPC and council, which was in May and June, we revised the draft and submitted it to HCD for their 90-day review. So they sent us comments September 29th. And since then, we have met with the HCD reviewers several times to go over the comments that we received. And so most of the comments that HCD provided us were really asking us to provide specific data points, such as evaluating our local data trends compared to the region. They wanted more information on how our needs and constraints tied to housing programs and how the programs are addressing public comments and overall housing needs. And then they wanted additional information for each of those programs regarding timeline and metrics. So like I said, we've met with them several times, and we use those meetings to provide clarification to our reviewers, and then to also discuss our approach to responding to their comments. And so the revised second draft is based off of the discussions and the actual formal comment letter that we got from HCD. And so just want to highlight that both HCD's letter and the revised and redline draft document are now available on the project website. Our goal is to submit it to HCD by the end of this week to start the following draft review. And I'll go over some of the project schedule later on as well. So I'm gonna go over the key changes specifically to the site's inventory. So in our first draft that we submitted in July, we provided information on precedent projects, and we also included information such as existing uses and FAR for each of our inventory sites. Even with that information, HCD did request additional clarification and information. So specifically, they wanted us to look at the redevelopment of non-vacant sites, so relating the specific criteria to each of those opportunity sites, specifying if, was it a low FAR property, if it was like an underutilized parking lot, for example, and then to also demonstrate the city's past completion rate for pipeline projects to ensure that they would be completed within the 6th cycle. So in addition to the information, the general information, we also made specific changes to the site's inventory that included adding opportunity sites, the 1250 Grant Road, Nob Hill Center, and the Century Theater 1500 North Shoreline Boulevard property. We also updated the site inventory based off of newly submitted applications. And based off of HCD guidance, we also included some projects that are under construction, but didn't receive their final certificate of occupancy at the start of the planning period, which was June 30th of this year. And then we also reduced some capacities for some of the larger shopping centers that we had in our inventory. We did a significant, almost 80% reduction of estimated capacity to be conservative for those sites because of the existing uses. So those are the changes we made to the site's inventory. HCD also wanted us to analyze, let me just highlight some of the site's inventory changes based off of this chart here. So based off of the last slide, those changes are reflected in this chart. Mainly, it's the increase in the pipeline projects in row A. As you can see, we did add projects that were approved and under construction, but did not receive their final occupancy. And we also changed the opportunity sites. Again, these are adding the new opportunity sites and then reducing capacity on the large shopping centers. That kind of was a net change. So that's for row A and row B. And as you can see on the first arrow on the right-hand side, our total realistic capacity has been increased. But again, that increase is generally due to the addition of the already approved projects. So this doesn't change the inputs for our environmental analysis. You can also note that there's a change in the last 2 rows right here. They highlight the buffers that were presented in July in the last row, and then our current buffer, which is the row right above. So the big change here is that our moderate buffer is coming in at the lower end. It's only at 16% right now. The recommended range is 15 to 30%. However, this isn't much of a concern considering that after we remove pipeline projects and ADUs, the buffer actually on the remaining RENA is 72% for lower income and about 23% for moderate income. And then based off of how we can utilize lower income units towards moderate income afterwards, there's not much of that major concern between the combined 30% and the 16% for lower and moderate. And then that concludes the site's inventory portion. We also had comments from HCD regarding our AFFH analysis. This is the affirmatively furthering fair housing portion of our site's inventory. So in our July draft, we used what we call the TCAC opportunity maps. And even though that reflected the analysis that's covered in these 4 bullet points on the slide, HCD did request additional analysis. So you can see that the 4 findings, they apply to the site inventory and reflect the analysis, but this just provided additional, in our revised draft, we provided additional analysis, as you can see in this graphic on the right-hand side. So the additional analysis, what it meant was comparing the distribution that we have of our existing units in the city to the lower income units that are identified in the site's inventory. And we did it on 4 major findings. You can see here it's listed as income, opportunity to resources, education domain, and race and ethnicity. So the data analysis showed that the city's housing element is not concentrating new lower income housing in lower resources or segregated neighborhoods. Instead, each of these are shown to each of these show on the maps that are included in our revised draft housing element is that the sites that are included in our sites inventory are located in areas that are generally with higher income households. They are located in highest resource areas with higher educational scores as well. So right here, this map specifically on the slide is the percentage of low to moderate income by census tract. And then the other maps for the other findings are included in latest draft as well. And just want to highlight that the analysis here does exclude the North Bayshore census tract simply because North Bayshore is kind of unique. It is identified as a low resource, but based off of the potential of all the programs we have out there, you know, the plan for the area will overall improve access to opportunity for residents out there. And then the last major change that we did to the draft housing element is to the programs. So overall, HCD requested specific metrics and objectives and timelines attached to actions for all of the programs. So what we did was we completely reformatted the housing plan in order to accommodate all those details and reorganize that section of Chapter 3. By doing so, we also created an implementation schedule at the end of that chapter that highlights how we're going to implement the proposed programs. And we included programs that were requested by the public and City Council. When we submitted to HCD in July, we included some programs based off of council direction, and there were other programs that we needed additional staff resource time to figure out how we were going to implement them. But all of those programs now that have been directed by council from our last study session are included in this November version of the draft. So in some cases, you know, the programs that we included that were based off of City Council or public input also aligned with HCD comments. So these included, you know, reducing parking for affordable housing, creating the incentives program for ADUs and SB9 duo developments. Aside from that, HCD also provided specific comments on programming, such as articulating very specific concrete actions. So there are a list of modified programs. I highlight the specific numbers on the slide, but they're all they're covered in the staff report in a chart, and then also redlined in the draft track changes version. I just want to highlight that these action items do add specific programming, like adding live work opportunities, updating our impact fees, adding steps to improving affordable housing development within our notice of funding availability processes. So this concludes the response to HCD comments portion. So our first question to EPC is, does the EPC have any recommendations on the new or modified program since the last draft housing element? And then as discussed on the last slide, you know, the draft has been revised to respond to and includes all the programs that were previously directed by City Council, which does include, you know, all the input that we've collected from the community and from EPC from previous study sessions. So the following section of the presentation will cover a few alternate programs that came from public comments. These are an opportunity for EPC and Council to weigh in on these additional proposals and provide policy direction because they have not previously been included. I want to state that based on HCD's comment letter and our discussions with them, it doesn't appear that any of these programs are necessary to comply with state law and housing element law. And so, you know, staff recommendation is to not to include some of these alternate programs at this time. Some of the reasons is due to the timing of when we want to submit our housing element draft. We have worked significantly with the community and with EPC and Council since the start of this project back in 2021. And so right now, if we're including some of these programs, you know, they have been previously discussed and were excluded for some of them. Some of the programs are currently under review and in the process of collecting community input. And so, we also just want to make sure if we're adding new programs that there is enough time and resources to dedicate to programs that EPC and council have, put into the strapped housing element and to prioritize, moving the needle for affordable housing. So one of the main sections that we want to talk about in terms of adding programs is additional rezonings. So rezonings from public comments, we received a lot of comments about rezonings, and some of the main three ones that we've gotten was regarding the downtown precise plan. Council members did express interest in updating a comprehensive downtown precise plan to include residential uses. But right now, we don't currently have outreach or analysis on how the density and how that will be incorporated with other elements of the downtown precise plan. We've also gotten feedback on wanting to propose industrial areas as underutilized sites and to include them in the sites inventory. We want to highlight that there are already affordable housing that's proposed on industrial sites, such as the ones that we are going to be rezoning that was recommended from the last study session. And then, we want to make sure that we're also considering if we are converting industrial sites and rezoning them to residential, that we're evaluating the remaining inventory of industrial land in the city. Then the last one that we've gotten a lot of feedback on is Charleston Plaza. That site was brought up by EPC the last time, but when we brought it to council in June, there wasn't much interest, and so that wasn't included, but it has come up in public comments, so we're kind of bringing it up again. We do want to highlight that there currently is an application from the property owner to rehabilitate that site for the allowed R&D uses there, so that might not be the best use of our rezoning efforts. Separately, so those are just covering kind of general zonings. We do want to call out the R3 zoning district because it is a standalone project in itself right now. The other three are just essentially conceptual. Right now with the R3 zoning district, it is a project that is underway. So we did receive comments that wanted to include R3 zoning update. Just to kind of remind everyone, this was brought to council and EPC in previous study sessions, and due to the fact that the R3 timeline and some of the uncertainty based off of the feedback we're getting from the community and the displacement concerns that we had, R3 was specifically excluded from the housing element, and so since then we have not included it. But just kind of bringing it back up, some people have interest in promoting this, so we're highlighting it here. Because the R3 zoning update is going through community outreach right now, and it is underway, there is possibility to do density increases when the project is brought to council and EPC, but it is not, it is still under review with the community, and so there are both sides to the coin to this, and so we want to highlight that the housing element already includes a program to ensure that we are allowing the allowed density that's built in our general plan to constrain those at the base minimum. But if we're looking to do added density increases, that's something that can be evaluated with the R3 zoning project and doesn't necessarily have to be part of the housing element. And then another alternate program that was raised by the community is the inclusion of requirements to replace demolished rent stabilized units. The housing element currently includes a number of elements related to the displacement response. We have updated our draft document, and it includes acquisition and the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing. There is a right of first refusal requirements for displaced tenants. There's also the exploration of community-based preservation strategies like the COPA, TOPA, and Community Land Trust. All of these are inputs from the community that we've gone thus far, and the enforcement of tenant protections and the city's relocation assistance ordinance to support displaced tenants. So staff does plan on bringing a displacement response strategy to council for a 2023 study session. And this will include the exploration of requirements for the replacement of demolished rent stabilized units in new developments. Like I said, it is being studied by staff, and there are several options that are under review and will be presented to council pretty soon. So it is moving along. It's not entirely necessary to add it to the housing element because there are several options that need to be considered, and it will be presented to council, like I said, in 2023. Right now, because SB 330 is still in place, it does require the replacement of rent stabilized units with affordable units. So that does preserve and address some of the concerns about displacement. So replacement requirements aren't currently explicitly referenced in the housing element, just because the correct mechanism is still under review. And then the last major alternate program is eliminating parking requirements. So right now in our draft housing element, we have a specific program addressing reduced parking for affordable housing. We also are looking at updates to our TDM ordinance to allow for additional parking reductions and to make sure that as part of the parking reductions, we're also enhancing the alternative mobility that a project can propose. We also want to highlight that a lot of our sites are in the North Bayshore and East Wisman precise plans, and those precise plans have reduced parking standards, and so there's no parking minimums in those areas already. There's also recently passed state law that reduces the parking constraints for areas that are close to transit. We want to highlight that we've gotten both public comments that have supported the elimination of parking requirements for multifamily housing, and then also the preservation, mainly in concerns of parking impacts to the surrounding neighborhoods. So for each of the 4 programs that we highlighted for alternate programs, there are pros and cons to including them in the housing element. So we want to pose the question to EPC. Does the EPC recommend adding any of the alternate programs? And if so, does the EPC wish to add them as part of this current housing element or part of a future update to the housing element? So that essentially concludes most of my presentation. I'm just going to highlight the questions here. These are the 2 main ones, and you can see the 4 sub-questions to the alternate programs. And then I'm going to go on to the next step slide, just to give a little bit of a brief overview of what to look forward to. So, we initiated the housing element project at the beginning of 2021, and we have presented at community meetings and study sessions, more than 20 plus months, and we started from the development of the framework to the methodology to the draft to tonight, where we're going to go over the revised draft. And so we've received feedback from the community and EPC and council, and this is where we landed right now. We will be submitting the revised draft to HCD by the end of this week. And through the 60-day review, HCD has stated that they will work with us to make minor revisions. So all the feedback that we are collecting tonight, if there's any direction that we get from council in December, we will bring it up to HCD to incorporate into our housing element. And hopefully that keeps us on schedule. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, the rezonings that are associated with the housing element and the environmental impact report will be brought to EPC December 7th, as you can see on the slide, and then to City Council January 24th. And we do want to get that completed because several of those rezonings are for projects that are in the pipeline. And then depending on HCD's determination of our draft and the input that we get from the study sessions from tonight and in December from council, we anticipate adoption hearings in early 2023. So that concludes the end of my presentation. I'm just going to go back to the question slide one last time so you can take a look. And if you have any questions, we look forward to answering them. Thank you.
Okay, so next we'll move to public comment. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. EPC clerk will start the timer and let you know when your time is up. So do we have people wishing to speak? We'll
Not
allow 3 minutes.
anyone wishing to speak at this time?
Really?
No speakers.
Okay. Then we will bring it back to the EPC. So there are, before we get started, there are two topics that could raise a potential conflict for a commissioner. And so I'd want to make sure that we touch base on those before we would do anything else. Staff has asked the EPC specific questions on these items, but if the EPC would like to discuss them tonight, please raise your hand. These are specifically item 1.4, the religious and community assembly sites for housing, and the second one is the inclusion of general plan village centers in the site inventory. Does anyone specifically want to discuss those two items? If not, Commissioner Nunez.
Yeah. So how would that work in terms like I'm barred from bringing it up?
If you want to raise those items, even if it's questions, then we'll recuse the one member. When we're done with that, then we'll bring him back. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I do have some questions. It's like, am I erring on the side of caution? Yes.
Okay. All right. So then we will ask Commissioner Dempsey to recuse himself briefly. And
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I do live in close proximity to some of the sites that would be affected by those decisions, and so I will recuse myself and disappear until you call me back.
Yeah. All right. So while he's gone, we're going to focus just on the things on these items and then bring him back for everything else. So Commissioner Nunez, where did you go? There you are.
Sure. Yeah, so my question around the religious sites was, I noticed that it is currently calling for a 30 to 40 unit per acre density standard. And I was kind of like taking a cursory look, so it's not exact, but cursory look at some of our more prominent affordable housing projects recently. And, you know, like they were all in the 60 to 80, unit per acre density range. And so I just wanted to kind of get some guidance from staff regarding, have we had, whether it's like in the recent, like meaningfully recent past, had a, not necessarily like a market rate project with affordable component to it, although, you know, if that's of note, by all means. But I'm wondering, is there like a prominent affordable housing development that we've had in the meaningful past that was coming in at that 30 to 40, unit per acre? And, you know, in your experience, is that economically, like what's the economic implications of a density standard at that level for affordable projects?
Well, that's a great question, Commissioner. Thanks for asking. I can't speak super eloquently on the economics of it, but I'm sure Michaela, who's in the audience right now, can jump in. She's raising her hand. I will say that we have had, I'm just looking up not a recent project, but just trying to get a year built here. I don't have it. There's a senior housing project on near Ortega that's about that density. And I think it probably dates from the 90s. So it's not super recent, but there are a few other sites in the city that are at that density. I think one of the things that we're looking for here is, there could be an opportunity for an organization that is otherwise not profitably using their land, right? So it's not a for-profit enterprise, and they don't have to outbid for the price of land, and that changes the whole density equation. But since Michaela has joined, I'm going to let her speak on that question as well.
Thanks, Commissioner Nunez and Commissioners Michaela Hellman-Tincher from the Housing and Neighborhoods Division. That's right. Most of our typical affordable housing in Mountain View requires a much higher density to account for the economies of scale in getting as many units as possible on the site to cover the cost of the land and then construction, because there does need to be cash flow. But these religious sites in particular are unique in that they're not meant for cash flow particularly. There have been situations in other cities where religious institutions have done really quite small projects that have connected to their mission and have been funded in non-traditional ways, not necessarily through the processes that we would use to do a 100-unit building, and those have worked. So I think that it's possible, even though it would not probably be the same method that we would proceed with on a typical vacant piece of land with a typical affordable developer.
Okay, got it. And quick follow-up on that. The St. Joseph's site on Church Street, in terms of just that kind of property, am I correct to say that when it was redeveloped, it included a housing component? So I guess on the one hand, I think there's a commercial or office use or like a meeting use in that kind of building. I'm just wondering, what, and maybe, it's not a, easy question to answer, but, roughly what equivalent, like if that was housing as opposed to like office, like, is there a ballpark estimate of what that density might be, a building like that typically?
So you're talking about the office building. If it were a residential, what kind of density would that be?
Yeah.
Oh my. Yeah, I'd have to think about that for a second, do some math, but I'll get back to you.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's all the questions I have for that one.
Clark?
Yeah, I'll just ask now to be safe. So in the staff report, there's the section that talks about potential additional rezonings and a few items mentioned there, but that also, staff also notes that it could potentially require a recirculation of the EIR and obviously the implications of that. But so I'm just trying to understand, and then at the very end it mentions we recommend committing to it, having those as added to the back pocket list. And so I'm curious if it's studying the rezoning that triggers the recirculation of the EIR, or if adding it to the back pocket also does that too, or if adding it back to the back pocket with your recommended language doesn't necessarily require recirculation of the EIR. And then sort of part B to that is, I assume the other things like, R3 displacement, all those things, those wouldn't require recirculation of the EIR. It would just be the rezoning pieces.
You're referring to the religious site piece, Commissioner Clark?
In the what piece?
I'm just what piece are you of the two, the general plan centers of the community religious sites?
It's sort of related to sites. I can ask it later if it isn't specific enough to like religious sites, but it's under EPC question 1, alternative programs for consideration, and it's the rezonings. So maybe it's best if I ask it later, since I don't think the religious sites are specifically called out there. And
then I don't know whether this, I'll ask them now in interest of discussion. Not really a question about the inclusion of the general plan village centers, but it's in the way that it's being included. On page 300 of version 2, it specifically discusses the way that staff has incorporated those sites that would be rezoned and they're discounting those at an level of 80%. So they're, even though they could potentially provide, I think it was 15 units, only 303 are actually being included in the site inventory. Is that in the totals did I interpret that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct, Chair Cranston. So as I presented, when we're trying to look at some of those sites based off HCD's comments, some of those larger sites, even they fit within our methodology of the year they were built. There are, because they are in shopping centers, there are viable tenant spaces. So to be conservative, we have reduced the capacity that's identified in the site's inventory.
So when we would put that forward, we're effectively creating a capacity for 1515, but for this cycle, we're only including 303 for cycle 8. Sounds like, is that, yes?
Can you repeat your question again? You said cycle 8?
Sorry, cycle 6. So it's, I mean, the way I read it is when we do that rezoning, it'll have a capacity of 1,515 units in those spaces, in those locations. But for this cycle, we're only including 303 for getting to our number to meet the RENA numbers. We're actually there's more capacity, considerably more capacity than you think will actually be achieved during the cycle.
Correct. Yeah. So the rezonings themselves will increase the capacity because we are allowing residential uses to match what is in the general plan right now. But as identified in the sites inventory, we have reduced that capacity by 80%, just as a figure to include in our sites inventory.
Okay. And is that typical of other cities? I had the impression San Jose didn't discount theirs quite so significant.
Yeah, so different cities have approached it somewhat differently. I believe maybe it was in Long Beach where they did, or in LA where they did kind of a comprehensive discounting. We're only targeting this mainly because these are the larger shopping centers with some viable tenancies in that place. So we are being conservative and reducing some of that.
Right, thank you. Commissioner Haymeyer?
I have an answer for Commissioner Nunez. I would estimate it to be about 75 units per acre across the whole site if it was residential. And if you are kind of not counting the church part of the property, it would be more than that. So all would be closer to 100 units per acre.
Commissioner Haymeyer?
Thank you. And just to follow up on Chair Cranston's point, so the discounting in the conversations you've had with HCD, has that been something that they're amenable to for a site? To the best of my knowledge, right, there aren't plans for in the 8-year cycle for redevelopment at the Nob Hill Shopping Center, but HCD seems to be okay with that discounting methodology. Does that come up, or is that something that we're offering?
No, they did review our draft methodology with that discounting, and they had no concerns. Okay. Now that's not to say that they won't. I definitely have to knock on wood. They might come up with something, but sure. But they reviewed our draft methodology and they didn't have concerns.
Got it. And the idea is that by being so conservative with an 80% discount rate, we're not trying to
we're trying to
overstate the possibility.
Right. We're basically saying that, if 1 out of 5 of these happen, right, we're not going to say all of them will happen, right? We're saying that if a very, very small number of them happen, then we'll have met the intent of the RENA, and we can kind of identify a larger number of opportunity sites, but at a lower probability of each one. And they are supportive of that methodology.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any other questions about the religious sites or the general plan, the village centers in Alcamena? Eric, can you bring back Commissioner Dempsey? Oh, there's, I don't know if he's listening. Commissioner Dempsey, you can walk back into the room. There he is. Okay. All right. So let's open up for commissioner questions. Start with who has questions. Vice Chair Yin.
This is a very general question. I was curious, in the meetings with HCD, do you know if those people who have been reviewing and meeting with you are the ones that will do the review of the final? Or is it a separate group of people?
No, it's all the same people.
Excellent. Okay. And I'm just really glad they had suggested that we don't go with an approved plan, that they work with us continually until we get to the final product. That just ensures the likelihood that we will pass. So, okay, great. Thank you.
Well, nobody has questions. I have a bunch of questions. On page 31, under item 1.3, a phrase is used, contemporary building types, in the update. What the heck does that mean?
So,
anyway.
The reality is one of the challenges in the R3 code is that it was drafted in a period when the most common, apartment projects were, don't look like apartments look like that are getting built today, right? I mean, the most economical way to build apartments today is, you see what's going on a lot now. It's a very typical kind of apartment style. It's just not, it doesn't look the same as the garden apartments and the outdoor walkway apartments, things like that. It's just not a contemporary building type. So we want to make sure that our standards reflect the ways that multifamily housing is being built today.
So it sounds like there's no actual definition. Who would decide whether we've achieved this or not? And how would you evaluate our success?
Well, we would hire a consultant who has a lot of experience with current apartment building. And they would use their professional judgment to see where there are conflicts between our standards and the way that apartments are being built today. We've already done this to a certain extent with R3, and we've found that there are conflicts. That's one of the things that we want to fix about R3. Yeah, we would kind of do a more thorough job of that across more zoning districts. And also the other part of the goal of the project is to ensure that standards are consistently applied across zoning districts. So some of our precise plans have very specific language. Is that language necessary? Can it be pulled out and put into a common document so that the precise plans can be more streamlined, things like that.
Question number 2. So like HCD, I'm really happy that there's much more detail and timelines and schedules in this. But I guess I'm kind of an ROI kind of a person. What do I get for the amount of time that's being spent? And staff is frequently telling us how much time they don't or don't have. And at least by my math, the updates associated with the ADU and SB 9 changes will not, in the end of the day, provide the same kind of return in the amount of capacity for the city as something like what we were just discussing. Okay. The update, item 1.3 and those updates isn't due for completion until December of 2026. And we're going to be working on ADU updates and things like that well before that. And I'm not suggesting that we don't do the ADU updates, but it seems like I'm questioning the prioritization of that and staff's time, and given the potential impact it will have on our availability for housing relative to something like 1.3, which we were just talking about. That would seem like it would have a much greater benefit to the city, to ability to achieve the housing element. Why was 1.3 put so far out into 2026, and things that maybe don't necessarily provide the same level of housing impact prioritized earlier in the cycle?
Yeah, it's really about flexibility for council to bring forward other priorities like the downtown precise plan, like R3, and focusing on those districts and the outreach necessary to update those districts. You know, I think this is something that we can probably do fairly quickly, but you know, it's again about giving councils opportunities for choice in the meantime. If the EPC wants to recommend front loading those, that's something that you can recommend to council.
Wait for the discussion portion of that. On page 267 and 305, you discuss the units that are in progress and are about ready to be complete. One comment suggested that one of those units could have been occupied prior to June 30th. If I read the document correctly, the housing element isn't really from 2023. Their counting started, for all intents and purposes, January 1, 2022, correct? So anything after, July 1. So if it wasn't finished by June 30th, and we got an occupancy permit on July 1 or later, it's part of cycle 6. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, so there's yes, that is correct. Essentially, there's two different, I guess, starting time. The start time for the housing element is January 31st, but there is a projection period, and this is when they calculate all of the RHNA numbers. So that is included up until June 30th, so July 1st of this year.
And I'll also add that it's a final certificate of occupancy, and that's a very technical thing that's issued. And it's the reason why it's that is because that is a standardized thing across all jurisdictions. They all issue final certificates of occupancy. Now, jurisdictions can allow residents to move into buildings if the building is safe to be inhabited before final certificate of occupancy. So yes, there are cases where there might be a temporary certificate of occupancy or some other provision that allows people to be moving in before, you know, say that June 30th, 2022 date. But, you know, the example of the 950 El Camino project, they received their final certificate of occupancy in August.
I'm kind of focused on site inventory. The next one is the large site cap. So you're not capping in the way, you're not capping the number of units in the site inventory, but you're capping the number of units that can be counted for below market rate. Is that, if I'm reading that correctly? So the total number of units is still there, but you're not going to allow, you're not counting what it could be there to be conservative. You're trying to be more conservative on those. Is that? And it's on page 280.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that we're trying to do with that. One is we're trying to reflect HCD's specific direction that they would be skeptical of sites with fewer than 50 or more than 150 lower income units. So we're trying to reflect that specific direction from them. We're also trying to limit the effect of one large site having a major no net loss impact. So if a developer comes in on one of these sites and decides to build, you know, if it's a fairly large site that allows 400 units or something, decides to build 400 units and only does 15% of them as lower income, that could have a, you know, a pretty big effect. You know, if we count all 400 units as lower income in the site inventory, could have a really big effect on our no net loss and would force us to go out and try to find more sites to rezone during the no net loss process. That seems like a really big challenge that we're trying to forestall. The other aspect is what you brought up, which is just to be conservative, to show that we're not being overly generous in our assumptions around lower income and moderate income units.
So would that apply to Middlefield Park? It wasn't, I couldn't find that in my.
So it doesn't apply to pipeline sites.
Okay, so it's just things that haven't gone through. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Then the other discounting that you're doing is range on pages 289 to 290. You're basically discounting sites by anywhere from 55 to 85%. It wasn't entirely clear to me the methodology that was being used on why some were discounted only by taken down by 15% and others were taken down by as much as 45%. Can you comment on?
So that one is, I think, related to the likelihood of becoming a residential project. So in some parts of the city, we have a fairly high confidence that if there is redevelopment at the site, it's going to be residential. El Camino is a good example of that. We've seen very little redevelopment on El Camino that hasn't been residential. On the other hand, there are some parts of the city where we have less confidence that a project will be residential. Downtown, the San Antonio Center area, and those are areas where we discounted them closer to 50%.
Okay.
And this is all based on our past experience of you know, observations of past development proposals.
And then one last question. It's mentioned in the report, but then Ellen didn't mention it in hers, and I don't see it on the map yet. And that's 685 East Middlefield. Is that now part of the site inventory?
Yeah, that's in the pipeline now because they submitted an application.
Okay. Kind of smirking there. And then, like, conversely, sorry, the request by the owner of the property of the car wash at El Camino and Del Medio to remove them from the list. You've received that, and we'll honor that, or what's the process there?
I mean, that's certainly been what council has asked for in the past. We are fully prepared to remove them. You know, we don't want anybody on the list against their will. So if that's something that the EPC recommends and the council directs us to do, we will absolutely do.
One question about Commissioner.
I was just wondering about that process of like understanding that HCD wants to have revised drafts. Like, it seems like that could be a lot of revision. So is it handled as a case-by-case basis, or does it have to be a recommendation from EPC or the council when we hear from a property owner?
You know, I think we can probably proactively do it, remove it, given that council's past direction has been to remove sites where people have asked to be removed. So anticipating that, we can proactively remove it for the version that we send to HCD this week.
Thank you.
In addition to that, you know, we are working with HCD throughout that process. So, you know, if we do receive any additional changes or we have additional applications that come in during that time, because we're working with HCD, we can be collaborating during that time as well and keep it as updated as possible.
So are more questions on this, or are we ready to move into discussion? So, Commissioner Nunez?
Yeah, so sticking with the sites inventory here, it's my understanding, some of the sites I was going to bring up already came up, so thank you, commissioners and chair. With regards to Gamble Way, my understanding is that the developer is not looking to move forward with that project anymore. And it's currently, I think, being listed in that table 53, the under construction pipeline. Similarly, I am hearing something similar around the 870, I believe, East El Camino. Maybe, yeah, it'd be good to know from staff whether you know, you guys have heard something to the affirmative on that, and you know, whether or not that should be included in the pipeline projects list. And then also that 62 West El Camino site on where the U-Hauls are. I do believe that, and maybe this question is more just, you know, what you guys have heard around the current occupant of that property looking to expand some of the, you know, commercial operations that are around truck rentals. So, yep, I guess for sure, I'm curious to hear what you guys have heard about Gamble Way and the 870 El Camino.
Yeah, I mean, there's always chatter. You know, I think until somebody puts out an official press release or anything like that, we don't, you know, people always end up, you know, often end up selling entitlements or other, you know, other things can happen. I think, so I don't want to say that we, you know what's going to happen with 870 El Camino or with Gamble Way. But what I will say is that, you know, our sites our programs now include a monitoring of pipeline sites for new applications. And when new applications are submitted, we will update the sites inventory with those new applications. And so if somebody does come in and, you know, propose to do some, you know, new redevelopment of the Gamble Way sites or something like that, we'll update the inventory. And then in addition, it's also just good to recognize that oftentimes with these market rate projects, the sites are by definition underutilized because a developer has come in and said they want to add on or build a property. Excuse me. And in those circumstances, you know, it's kind of more conservative to assume the development that's actually happening because we're assuming such a small number of affordable units when the typical way that you do RENA is applying these lower income units to the sites.
Got it. I definitely don't want to make you speak more than I have to, Eric. But I guess a follow-up to that is is there a kind of like a time frame within which, for example, because I agree with you, there's always chatter around properties. I think some chatter is more, kind of credible than others. And so is there like a time frame where if, for example, there is a press release, as you noted, next month or the month before we're about to try and get our sites or our housing element approved, would a situation like that where a press release does get announced, would that create a situation where we would have to submit an entirely new draft? What's the impact? How easily mendable is that situation with regards to an approval?
I think I could elaborate on that. So I think Eric kind of alluded to that. It really depends on the timing on when we get this stuff and what we hear from HCD as well. I think if we do have to make any modifications, it won't significantly throw us back on our schedule to make any significant changes, mainly due to the fact that we do have an application, it has been approved. And so, we will make that decision on whether we rely on our existing capacity, what was proposed, or we could pivot back to what we would generally assume for an underutilized site. And I think using what is proposed would probably be the most conservative. In addition, this is the exact reason why we have a buffer and everything else netted, because even though we have a deadline for this housing element, everything's kind of continuous. It's kind of a rolling process. So we'll ensure that we do have the capacity throughout the city.
All right, awesome. Thanks.
Okay, and let's kind of the questions. Ellen, do you want to pull up your slides? The thing was, does the EPC have any recommendations on new or modified programs since the last draft housing element? Commissioners, input? My hands, I guess. I would just bring up the one thing that I mentioned before. I would like to see the pieces of 1.3 potentially moved forward. I don't know if other commissioners, in general, quite frankly, this is the housing element that I wished we'd seen in phase one and round one. It's the level of detail, the specificity. So I'm happy with what's there. On that one in particular, 1.3, I would like to see it happen a little faster than it's currently scheduled for, and I can leave it to others to decide. I just, when I looked at the impact of the ADU item, it didn't seem like it would have as much impact, and so if we have to trade resources, that seemed like one that might be a fair trade. But I don't know whether other commissioners would like to see that move ahead more quickly. If not, then we'll leave it as is. So anyone else? Commissioner Hemeyer?
Can I just ask a partly clarifying question and then answer yours? So my understanding is that my assumption would have been that these longer time horizons give staff and the city more flexibility for evaluation. Is that right? Is that kind of the idea that we know some of these things might happen sooner, but the longer time horizon doesn't bind the hands of future council or just general implementation? Is that a fair assumption of why the time horizons might be stretched out a little bit more?
Yes, I think that's a fair assumption, fair assessment. And
then what is the penalty? Like, let's say we do move it up a little bit and then we aren't meeting that target. Is it better to be more extended in that time horizon, or is it the same if we make the recommendation that Chair Cranston is suggesting of pushing it up forward? I just don't know how detailed. This all seems fairly new, of a deeper level of state oversight.
Yeah, so theoretically, if we're not meeting our target dates, your housing element can be found out of compliance.
So it's better to have a longer time span.
It certainly gives more flexibility, but again, we don't intend to miss our deadline.
Yeah.
We'll make it happen.
I mean, it seems to me, and Chair Cranston, I think this is a roundabout way of answering a question, right? It seems like that by being more aggressive in this housing element draft, we are actually doing the more conservative thing, right? It's more likely that we'll be compliant by maybe making some of these things stretch out a little bit longer, which isn't the intent, but I'd be curious to hear what others think. Because I think we are probably going to do the work a little bit sooner. Some of these, and I reread the Matrix report, a lot of those recommendations around process and streamlining, right, are dependent on staff and things that are in progress already, but expediting the timelines will maybe invite greater scrutiny.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Vinez?
Sorry, clarifying question. Are we talking about 1.3, the update ordinance and precise plan residential standards, or what 1.3?
So in the timeline on page 60 and 61, the completion of 1.3 doesn't occur until December of 2026. The items that are in specifically the review and ordinance update of precise plan residential standards as out there in December 2026. And that just seems like a long time to get around to getting the residential standards updated to me. So that's one specifically that I was seeing about moving for it. I fully understand what Commissioner Heermeyer is saying. I want to see it happen sooner, so maybe I just push it in other ways that I can. So, does that answer your question, Commissioner Nunez?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I might have some thoughts. Just need to...
Mr. Dempsey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to respond to Commissioner Heermeyer's question. For my part, as a general rule, I think it's wise to build more flexibility into the housing element. And I'll tell you why. I mean, first of all, if there's something that we want to have happen sooner than whatever deadline we set, to some extent, we have some power to drive that. I mean, we can just bring it up. We can agendize it, and we can say, hey, staff, let's go. What's happening with that? So we do have some ability to sort of drive a little bit of that planning, but more importantly, here's what I would worry about. If we set excessively tight timeframes and we miss one, and then we end up in a situation where the housing element is, as Eric said, out of compliance. What I would worry about is that being out of compliance could cause a scramble. Somebody could, I don't know, file a lawsuit, or somebody could file a complaint, or I don't really know actually what bad things can happen when a housing element is out of compliance. But what I wouldn't want to see is have us be technically out of compliance, get challenged, and then staff has to spend a bunch of time scurrying to try to solve it or respond to it or address it, which pulls them away from the other things that are substantive that we've asked them to do. And so I'm kind of a big believer in trying to protect the city and staff from sort of crises in the future, because there's so many things for them to do. I really want them to focus on like constructive fixing of things and not putting out fires. And I think having more flexible timelines it lowers the potential number of fires that they're going to have to deal with in the future. So that would be my broad perspective.
Chair Yin. You're on mute.
Just a clarifying question to start with on that point. 1.3 is not the R3, correct? It has nothing to do with R3? That R3 is completely separate? Or does this also kind of weave into R3?
So they are related, and we can, if the city proceeds with R3, we will have achieved a portion of 1.3, right? The portion of 1.3 that is about R3. However, if for whatever reason the city decides to pull the plug on R3, right? The R3 zoning update is really a complete re-envisioning of the district with completely new densities, you know, new character, new height, new everything, right? Whatever happens, if the city pulls the plug, this is us saying that we are committed to updating those R3 standards so that at least you are guaranteed to be able to build the density that you're allowed under the general plan.
Okay.
Isn't that the case already? That they would be able to build under the general plan?
So the standards, the way they're written now, frequently do not allow the number of units that are allowed in the general plan.
They contradict.
Yes.
And then it would be one by one coming before.
Yes, exactly. So projects would come forward with more units than are allowed in zoning than in the general plan, and the project would come forward and we just have to figure out the standards. We'd have to kind of figure out how that would happen. And so that's why this is a very valuable tool, a very valuable thing to do, because it gives a lot of transparency in the community about what is actually allowed on sites.
Would you say this is a large undertaking of staff time? Because it's hard to know.
It as a technical matter, I think it's actually not a huge undertaking, because the point isn't to re-envision the district. We're going to try to keep standards as close as we can to what they are, and we'll probably have a study session where we talk about, you know, what are some standards that the EPC and council is interested in being flexible on, you know, in shifting in order to accommodate densities. But because it's a more technical matter, and because the densities are already allowed in the general plan, I don't see it as something that requires a significant amount of either outreach or CEQA. There may be some outreach, but again, because technically it's already allowed, it would be less CEQA as well.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, everyone. I have a little bit of a sore throat and cough too, so bear with me. I'm responding to Chairman Cranston's perspective. I like Eric's approach of just being cautious that way and conservative, because it gives us room to also, if there's an opportunity to do it sooner, then it's just done sooner. We don't have to state it. As far as I'm concerned, Eric, there's no penalty if you say something's going to be done later on, but then you do it sooner. I don't think the state's going to be upset with us about that, right? Okay, so, and that's how I look at it. And that's the reason why, because it gives us that flexibility. If you push it up further, if you push it up to try and get it done sooner, we don't have that flexibility. And I think that's what we want to avoid. Thanks.
Well, that sounds like there's not support to do that. For any other, let me go back to how the question was worded. Any other changes to the programs or additional programs in this housing? Commissioner Nunez.
Yeah, so I guess a clarifying question around the order this time. Last time we had this discussion, we went through, you know, like each potential program. Are we doing something similar, or are we expected as part of this commentary, you know, or discussion, you know, are commissioners expected to just kind of like throw all their ideas out there, or are we kind of going item by item?
I'm looking at question number 1, which is, does EPC have any recommendations on the newer modified programs in the draft? So these are the things that are already in the draft. The next question is the things that staff brought up as other items. So
right. I guess I'm just, yeah, I don't want to jump back between 1.3 and then 1 point this and that. because I would be, I just wanted to make sure I, chimed in on that front, having gotten the clarification. I am open to making a recommendation around bringing that timeline forward for whatever that's worth. And then I did also want to bring up the religious sites again. And, sorry, Commissioner Dempsey, if you have to leave again, but my understanding was that the first time we brought it up was for questions only. So I don't know if that's, something we can go back to.
Yeah, it was actually supposed to be everything. Andy, do we need to?
Yeah, if the commission wants to revisit that issue, then Commissioner Dempsey needs to leave. And yeah, the idea was to have taken care of all of it at the front end. But if there's a desire to revisit it, he cannot participate.
At your direction, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to disappear for a bit.
If you're going to be proposing changes, then I guess Commissioner Nunez.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, again, my apologies. Just my understanding was it was questions, then discussion. So sorry about that.
Okay, so religious sites, Mr. Dempsey has left.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess one thing I would say about that, I appreciate that there is a kind of unique and novel approach that we're taking here with regards to almost kind of like some form of underutilized land. And I still feel some concern around the low density and in terms of, the viability of finding partners who are able to come in and, provide that kind of development work, right? I think it's kind of telling that the St. Joseph's site was primarily office space due to that kind of like feasibility of commercial being again far more established in terms of returns. And so one thing I would say or propose is that we do make a recommendation elevating the density to about like 60 units, and from the perspective of the religious organizations themselves, I mean, if they can get double the density and find a way to partner and get some sort of value stream out of that, I'm sure it's a win for them. And in terms of like our ability as a city to actually have this in 8 years be a reality versus something that was on a PDF 8 years prior, I think that would go a long way. And secondly, with regards to the religious sites as well, one of the benefits there is that we are talking about sites in the south of El Camino, and I was a little lost, during even reading it over and over. It was hard for me to understand kind of like what the 55%, 65% non-white / white, like what that kind of standard really meant. But in terms of one of the statements that Commissioner Haymeyer mentioned, I fully agree that the conservative thing to do as part of this process is to be aggressive, because I don't want any part of the things that we could get dinged for to ding us and us invite that builder's remedy, which is happening in Southern California. So one of the things that we can do if we increase this density here, or the proposed density as a recommendation, is both make it more feasible and in line with other projects that are affordable that we've seen in the city. We can get a stronger, I don't know if it's like a score or mark or grade, whatever, regarding the fair housing requirement by expanding into the south of El Camino and add almost like a value buffer there, if you will, and have more housing. So that's something that I'd like to put on the table as far as, I guess it would be 1.4.
Any other feedback on that? Commissioner Haymeyer?
Not fully understanding how we settled on the lower housing density. I would be fine increasing the cap because it seems like it would really be project specific based on what proposal is at the religious site. But I'd be happy to hear from staff if there's something that we might be missing by increasing that cap if it just doesn't seem realistic based on the character of the neighborhood, the potential sites. If there's something that would be a caution against it, I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, it seems like an easy way to potentially get more density should a project pursue it based on what we know. Because I just don't know if the affordable housing market, like if there's financing out at that lower range, because we haven't seen that recently.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think one thing to consider here is obviously the potential for state density bonus to come in. If these are 100% affordable projects, then, you know, under our, you know, we have a density bonus language in our code that says that, you know, any density bonus is allowed on sites that go through the NOFA process with the city. So if it is truly a subsidized housing project like other affordable housing projects that we do here, then the 30 to 40 units per acre wouldn't apply. I think when we were thinking about this range, we were thinking about, first off, you know, what's the minimum that HCD expects for lower income housing, which is 30 units per acre. But also what is, you know, potentially appropriate. I mean, we're obviously trying to ensure that this program is successful. And, you know, one way that a program is successful is by not creating neighborhood enemies. And so I think by doing that, we're creating both an opportunity for council to be selective with opportunities through the NOFA process at any density, but also providing some guidance to these religious sites that may want to do, as Michaela described earlier, a kind of mission-based project at a, you know, that fits their scale of that they are able to provide services.
Great. So just to repeat what I think I heard you say, 30 dwelling units per acre is HCD's floor.
Right.
Great. Thanks.
Vice Chair Yin.
I just had a quick question. In coming up with that, I didn't know if staff was able to speak to any of the owners of those properties to find out if they had any set goals or ideas about what they may do in the future, or if this was just more of a conceptual exercise.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah, we did do kind of initial outreach when we were also doing the outreach for the rezonings for the village centers and El Camino Real. We probably only got feedback from one or two of those property owners. And again, it's just an initial outreach, so we didn't go into the specific details on their intentions, but there was interest in supporting this kind of mission-based housing. I also want to state that the way the program is written and the specific action items, you know, it is a whole program in itself. So we will still be doing outreach with property owners and affordable housing developers to kind of develop what those standards could be and what incentives could be part of that, the success of that program. Right now, the density that's listed is just stated as a typical one, not specifically to respond to HCD's comment so that they can understand to what extent this program could produce additional housing.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'll take a comment. So way I read it, I kind of, in my head, we'd kind of overlay what's called medium density in the general plan, which is up to 35 dwelling units per acre as a kind of a by right thing. So they could come in and do whatever they want within that level. But if they wanted to go beyond that, just as Eric said, then they could come in through the NOFA process and do more. But giving them some ability to, just to not having to come back and apply for it. If they wanted to do something on a smaller scale, that I was kind of comfortable with that, and said if they want to come in and do a bigger project, then go for it. But for doing something that was kind of by right, that was in my head. So I listed a range there, but the medium density allows the 35 dwelling units per acre, and that's kind of what I was thinking. You were kind of, you said you wanted to tie it to something that exists, and that's something that exists. So in my mind, it was, you would kind of tie it to that. I don't know if that's what you were actually thinking, but that was kind of where my head went. And I'm comfortable with that. I would be uncomfortable saying it's going to be 50 units by right, and then it could be 75 or, without some process going along with it. So, kind of comfortable with the direction that staff is recommending.
That framing is really helpful. I would be comfortable if others share that and say that by right it's at this medium general plan density, and then with the NOFA knowing that opportunity to go more densely, it doesn't seem like it's as important to call out if the financing mechanism is really what triggers greater density on the site. Thank you. This has been really helpful.
Mr. Nunez?
Yep, so that sounded interesting to me. I just want to make sure I confirm my understanding of what you just mentioned, Chair. So if I'm hearing it correctly, it would be saying, and maybe this is what it already says, that medium density is a by right project, and the kind of like NOFA process is what would enable anyone who's interested to submit an application or, what have you, initiate a process to develop that 60 to whatever density level. And is that, am I hearing that correctly?
That's what I was, Eric, I don't know whether you haven't commented on this, but that was kind of where my head was going.
Yeah, just to clarify for anybody who doesn't know, it's the notice of funding availability. So when we collect our housing impact fees and our, our other fees that go to affordable housing, that's how we distribute these funds to affordable housing developers. And so we have provided in the density bonus ordinance, and again, it's a little bit of a misnomer to say by right and then like council approval, because density bonus is by right as well. And I think that's an important thing to say, right? You could still do, for example, an SB 35 project, ministerial project, through the NOFA process. It's our way of really ensuring that council can target funds to really high quality projects that serve community goals, which could include building more housing south of our community.
Is there a different term you would use for kind of aligning to the medium density general plan as on religious sites?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
It's a different term than calling it by right. I mean,
oh, no, that's fine. Yeah, that's, I think you could say, I think you could say by right at that level, but I think you wouldn't want to say that necessarily we're introducing new discretion in the NOFA process. There is discretion there, obviously, with the funding, but in the actual development review that's happening, it can also be by right.
I just wanted to add that even outside of the NOFA process, a 100% affordable project can get an 80% density bonus. So that's under state law.
Okay, and for that density bonus, for example, if I was a developer going for something like that, I would not be able to do that until the zoning amendments were completed. And as currently in the proposed timeframe, it's seeming like 2026 would be the date. So we wouldn't be able to receive applications for these kinds of projects before January 1st, 2027. Is that accurate, roughly?
Well, I would say that we wouldn't be able to take in applications until after the code is amended for it. That could be any time in the next 3 years.
Okay, cool. Just because it said, I'm seeing it here, it says 2026. So, I mean, I would be, if we were thinking within the next 3 years, which is like what, like 2025, I mean, I'd be interested in bringing that a little bit forward. I know that, you know, there's a lot of stuff on your guys' plate, but in terms of like the, you know, very targeted number of sites and, you know, like limited number of sites, relatively speaking, you know, I think that this is one that we might be able to, you know, make an ask of a little bit sooner. You know, I would be interested in recommending that, you know, to be like set by something like 2020, early 2024, late 2023. Again, just because I'm very clear on, you know, the, how can I say, the lack of entry opportunity in this area for, you know, low income and, you know, minority people typically. And so I do find that to be a, you know, a high value item and high priority item, both from a, again, a further, you know, affirming fair housing, but also from, you know, something that I think is a good value for our city to operationalize. So if people are interested in bringing that forward, you know, yeah, I'd be interested in putting that out there as well.
Not hearing. So I guess what I'm hearing and not hearing is folks are comfortable with the idea of 1.4 and that 35-ish dwelling unit per acre kind of density. But there's not necessarily, maybe you're getting the same kind of reaction that I got to my pulling it forward, Commissioner Nunez, that we kind of like the timeline. If it's done sooner, cool, but not give the staff the chance to work through it, kind of a thing.
Yeah, the initial ask was, you know, looking at and hearing from staff around potential benefit from bumping that up, you know, in terms of the density. Having heard staff's reasoning, the new ask here is, hey, let's bring, I'm looking at the redlined draft where it says 2026. In fact, I think it got bumped out a year. And what I'm, you know, throwing out there for the group is, for the commission is, hey, you know, given the kind of importance of having more entry opportunities into this area of the city, that we, and given the, you know, relatively small number of sites and the targeted approach to this item, you know, that we bring that up forward in terms of the time frame towards, you know, late 2023, recommend, you know, getting this done by like late 2023 or early 2024. So that's what I'm proposing, and seeing if anyone else is interested in kind of bringing that timeline a little bit forward, or recommending that as such.
Are people in support of that approach, or I will take silence as meaning I'm comfortable leaving it where it's at. Commissioner Hairmeyer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the message to staff would be, yes, let's expedite this, but I am now convinced that it's okay to be a little bit more fluid in when we think we're actually accomplishing these things, with the internal expectation that we'll do what we can to advance it on a faster timeline.
Mr. Nunez?
Oh, sorry, I left my hand up. I mean, yeah, if it's sounding like people are comfortable with that, then that's just what it is.
All right, then any other changes about what's already been incorporated into this draft 2? Not, then we'll move on to question number 2.
Should we bring Commissioner Dempsey?
Yeah. So we can bring back Commissioner Dempsey. All right. So do you want to pull up your list again? There were so does the EPC recommend any additional alternative, adding any of the alternative programs? If so, do they wish to add them as part of the housing element? Where to go? Okay, and that was the R3 zoning, the replacement strategy for stabilized units, parking regulations. Or are we comfortable with what's in we have today? Commissioners. Hands. It's like folks are comfortable without these, sounds like. Okay. All right. And now, Commissioner Nunez.
Yeah, I guess a question then, since no one else jumped in here. With regards, can you go back to, what was the one regarding the rental replacement? That slide, please. So response strategies, plan for 2023 study session, including. So just a quick clarifying ask from staff. So the COPA-TOPA piece to this, is like, how does that relate to the displacement response? Or is it, is there room to kind of like separate those, or is the expectation from like HCD that, you know, if we're saying, you know, hey, we would implement like this displacement response strategy, would COPA be a part of that? I just kind of want to understand a little bit more about that relationship between kind of like what the response strategy is and if COPA and TOPA is already being like considered as a firm part of that.
Thanks, Commissioner Nunez. COPA and TOPA are referenced in, I can't remember the program number, I can look really quickly, but in one of our programs where we reference innovative approaches to promoting affordable housing, and you know, we reference it as something we'd like to study and explore. That's still under study and exploration. We do intend on including it in the study session relating to displacement response, but it's sort of more broadly referenced in the housing element.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Then if there's Commissioner Clark.
Just back to my question. Do any of these? I think I hopefully read the staff report correctly, that the concerns around recirculating the EIR were around the rezonings and not necessarily the inclusion of the additional programs like parking reduction, those sorts of things. Is that right?
Parking reductions wouldn't have any effect on the EIR. The rezonings certainly would. And I think you were asking earlier, I don't know if we answered this question about whether the back pocket would affect the EIR. I think conservatively, yes, it would. You know, an EIR really studies any potential foreseeable outcome from the policy as drafted. So I think we would have to study the back pocket in the EIR.
Got it. What about the inclusion of R3? Just because it's already, as you identified, a program that's sort of underway. I'm just curious how that might impact the recirculation in the EIR.
Yeah, the inclusion of R3 almost certainly would. Again, there's still a lot of uncertainty about where the R3 project is going to end up. Certainly what we proposed to council, probably a year and a half ago now, could have added, several thousand units in capacity to the city. At that scale, certainly it would have to be recirculated.
Got it. So I don't want to belabor the conversation since no one else had comments on this, and we can probably move on. But just for the record, like I do think if HCD comes back with additional comments or concerns or things, like the two items that I would be generally comfortable looking at a second time, I know we've looked at these before, would be the inclusion of R3. Granted, we don't know how it turns out, but since that project is pretty far along, and granted we don't know the ultimate outcome, it's sort of low-hanging fruit, I think, from my perspective. And then also relooking at some of the parking minimums in other parts of the city. I know, as staff pointed out, North Bay Shore, East Lisbon, and then with state law, it eliminates a lot of areas, and obviously we would want to make sure that we, that would require us to study and implement likely, residential parking permit programs in certain parts of the city to mitigate the impacts of something like that. But I understand that probably most others and even staff isn't recommending the inclusion of those. I just wanted to share those comments as part of what I'm thinking might be something that we could do if there are additional concerns raised by HCD.
Mr. Nunez?
Yeah, I would have no problem with taking the approach mentioned by Commissioner Clark right now around R3 as low-hanging fruit. In fact, I wouldn't even mind supporting including that as a recommendation tonight. But I did have one question relating to the R3 piece, because I did notice that a lot of these in the sites inventory table, there's a lot of sites that all the way through just have like a 0 in terms of capacity. So I guess I was wondering how much, what does that mean for a lot of these sites to just have straight up zeros across the board? And then, if for example, many of these sites are in that R3 space, if we were to say hey, either now or at some other later point, we're comfortable recommending this as part of, the housing element here, would an assessment have to be done around some of these spaces? Do we need to have them with capacity, a total for capacity? If you can help me understand that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, unfortunately, those zeros were a typo that we just recently discovered, and we're going to get that corrected before we send it off to HCD. And apologies that we didn't catch that before it got to you all. But yeah, there should be, the totals are still correct in all the tables from the sites inventory. It's really in that table A itself, we did lose some of the data in transferring from our internal files. Okay,
cool. Got it. But yeah, just to close off that comment from Commissioner Clark, yeah, I don't mind R3 being a part of it either now or later as a recommendation.
Other questions? I guess I would be of the view that unless HCD comes back with something very different than what staff is talking about, I would prefer not to be including any of these things at this point. That doesn't mean that we don't need to do the R3 process, and we don't need to look at parking standards. But I would be uncomfortable including them unless HCD comes back and says, nope, sorry, you actually only have 5,000 units in against a target of 11,000, and go back to the drawing board. So that would be. I'd prefer to wait if for the sky to fall first. Other commissioners? No. Commissioner Haymeyer?
Yeah, I think I like Commissioner Clark's approach of waiting for the next set of comments, and if needed, then we can resurface it.
Yes, I'm actually pretty happy with the current process in that we're talking with HCD constantly and consistently until we have a final draft that we're pretty sure we're going to get approved. So barring any huge surprises, it looks like we're on a good path. And as a lot of the commissioners had stated earlier, the more flexibility we have with this particular document, I think the better off we are. And because we are moving forward on a lot of these other projects in earnest, it's not like we're just trying to put it out there and not including it, then I'm comfortable giving the most time and effort towards having the community review it and allowing for that process to naturally take place. So I'm comfortable with moving forward as staff has presented.
Mr. Gutierrez?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I'm in agreement. That's why I hadn't said anything beforehand. I like the approach that the city is taking with this, especially if we're conversing with the people who are going to review the document. If and when they say something otherwise to that effect, then I'd come back and discuss these points. But right now, I think we're good. Thanks.
Mr. Dempsey?
Yeah, I think I'm in the as-is caucus. We can talk about including it if we need to, if HCD seems to make that necessary or wise. But I think for now, I think going with staff's recommendation is the right move.
All right. Okay. Just staff's questions. Any last comments from commissioners, or otherwise we'll close this? I just will say, I was this version 2. I'm like, this is a good document, and I was pleased by what I saw, and so I really appreciate the hard work that staff has done on it. It's a major step forward from version 1. I know you've had a lot of discussions with people to do it, but I think I came away feeling like, okay, this is something that I could live with and I could support, and I can explain to people why it's there. So thank you for your hard work on it. Yeah. Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the biggest challenges we have sometimes as commissioners or just being members of a board or a governing body is to trust the process, right? Some of us haven't been through this. Others have maybe touched on it on an edge with projects that come up. But on a project like this, at this scale, when I heard that Eric and the team was speaking to HCD continuously, that gave me a little bit more reassurance that we're on the right path, right? And this version, like Chairman Cranston mentioned, I like this because it's more detailed oriented that way, but it's in partnership with who's the reviewers are going to be, and then also with input from the community. So I think the more we get involved with something like this, it's all about the iterations, right? You learn as you go. And when you make those edits, as you move into the process of further edits with help from the overseers, it goes a long way to just make the document more, realistic, right? And passable. And I think that's what we're looking for right now, with the added in bonus of just being flexible. So in case there are targets that we're looking at that have been designated at a later time point, if those get taken care of beforehand, that's a bonus. I mean, that's good. So we're not limiting ourselves or our potential, and I think that it's the right approach. So thank you, Eric, for that.
Right, and then we will we'll close out 5.1, and thank you, everyone. Item 6 is staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. Ellen's kind of given us a hint for what the next meeting is going to be. Commissioner Gutierrez, did you have an announcement first?
Yeah, wait. I'm a little confused, and maybe it's the medicine I'm taking, but are we not going to vote on the recommendations? Are they just as is? That was presented to us by the team, or?
Well, I guess it was. Do I need? I mean, I don't think I needed to because it was. But
so we don't have to vote.
No, it's a study session, and so the commission.
It's the medicine
give
then.
An input, yes.
All right, so my medicine's kicking in. All right, thank you.
All right, so announcements. Here.
You know, I'm afraid I've been a little under the weather and I haven't really prepared anything to discuss. And I'm sorry I haven't set up any holiday party, which I promised to do at the last meeting. But I will get on that. Yeah, as you said that, and as Ellen said, the next meeting is going to be more housing element fun, where we're going to be doing the rezonings. That's what I have to report.
Right. Then we will. Anything else? We will close the November 16th meeting of the Development Planning Commission at 9:01 p.m. Thank you, everyone, and Commissioners Gutierrez and Eric, please get healthy.
Feel better.
Feel better.